2 years. That's how long Han Seo-jun's children hadn't smiled, not for their father, not for the specialists, not for anyone. Then a waitress who had no idea who he was, dropped to her knees beside his table. And in 10 seconds, she did what money couldn't buy in 2 years. He didn't know her name yet. But watching her, he already felt like he did. This is the story of the woman his children never forgot, and the truth about her that could either save his family, or destroy everything he's built since his wife died. The maitre d' at the Aurelia had an unspoken rule: children did not interrupt the rhythm of a Friday night service. Yeji and Jiwoo had learned that rule without anyone ever teaching it to them out loud, because words, spoken words, had stopped being the language of their world 2 years ago. They sat at their father's table the way they always did, small and still, hands folded in their laps, watching the room move around them like they were furniture that happened to be 7 years old. Servers came and went. They refilled water. They set down bread. They asked Han Seo-jun, in low, deferential voices, if everything was to his satisfaction, and he nodded, and they left, and not one of them looked at his children long enough to notice that Yeji's mouth had started to shape a question no one was going to answer. Seo-jun noticed. He always noticed. It was the kind of thing that kept him up at 2 a.m., replaying it, wondering if there was a version of this dinner where his daughter didn't have to give up halfway through trying to be seen. Then a waitress broke formation. She wasn't even in their section, Seo-jun would learn that later, but she crossed the floor anyway, dropped to a crouch beside the table so she was eye level with 2 children who had spent an entire meal being talked around, and moved her hands. "Hi. I'm Naomi. What's your name?" Yeji's whole face changed. Jiwoo grabbed his sister's sleeve, urgent, delighted, and both of them started signing back so fast their hands blurred, a flood, 2 years of things nobody had asked them, spilling out to a stranger in the middle of a 5-star restaurant. And they smiled. Really smiled. The kind of smile that reaches the eyes and doesn't ask permission first. Seo-jun sat there with his fork halfway to his mouth, and felt something crack open in his chest that he didn't have a name for. His children hadn't smiled like that, hadn't smiled at all like that, since before their mother died. He'd tried everything. Therapists, specialists, a trip to Jeju he'd planned for 6 months. Nothing had worked the way this woman's hands worked in under 10 seconds. He didn't know her. He was almost certain of that. So why did some small, insistent part of him feel like he did? If this hook already has you sitting up a little straighter, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe now, because what's about to unfold between these 3 is going to wreck you in the best possible way. Naomi didn't think much of it at first. She signed with kids all the time. It was reflex, not heroism, and she genuinely hadn't clocked that the man at the table was the kind of wealthy that made restaurant managers nervous. She just saw 2 kids being talked past and couldn't let it happen, not when she knew exactly what that particular kind of invisible felt like. "You're really good with them," the man said, once his children had finally quieted enough to eat. His voice was careful, like he was testing the words before he used them. "Where did you learn?" "School, mostly. And I used to tutor." Naomi straightened, tucking a strand of hair back. "They're sweet. Sharp, too," Yeji corrected my sign for restaurant, like she's been doing this longer than me. Something flickered across his face. "She's 7. Doesn't mean she's not the expert in the room." Naomi smiled, easy, already turning to go. She had 4 other tables and a manager who clocked every extra minute she spent anywhere she wasn't assigned. "Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Han." Seo-jun Han. "Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Han." She didn't see the way he watched her walk away, like he was trying to solve something. He came back the following Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that. And by the third week, he wasn't pretending it was about the food. He requested her section specifically, called ahead to make sure she was on shift, and the hostess staff had started exchanging looks that Naomi pretended not to notice. "You're becoming a regular," she told him one night, setting down water glasses while Yeji tugged at her sleeve to show off a drawing. "I like the service," Seo-jun said. "Aha." Naomi crouched to admire Jiwoo's crayon rendering of what appeared to be a dinosaur wearing a bow tie, signing her enthusiasm, and missed the way Seo-jun's expression softened watching her do it. "You know most billionaires don't personally scout their waitstaff. Most billionaires don't have a reason to." She looked up at that. He held her gaze a beat too long, then glanced away first, like he'd surprised himself. It wasn't all easy, though. 3 weeks in, an older man at the next table, pinstriped suit, the kind of watch that cost more than Naomi's rent, snapped his fingers at her like she was staff at a hotel he didn't respect, which technically she was, but the way he did it made her stomach tighten. "Can you stop wasting time flapping your hands and take our order? Some of us actually want to eat tonight." The words landed like a slap. Naomi's spine went straight, her jaw tight, the practiced calm of someone who'd absorbed 100 versions of this comment before and learned not to let it show on her face. "I'll be right with you, sir," she said evenly. Seo-jun didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply turned in his chair, looked the man dead in the eye, and said, "She's teaching my children to communicate with their father for the first time in 2 years. I'd wait." The table went silent. The man muttered something and looked back at his menu. Naomi finished refilling water at Seo-jun's table with her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, from something closer to being seen, defended, in a way that undid her a little. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," Seo-jun said. "I wanted to." Naomi didn't have an answer for that. She just nodded and moved to the next table, and if her heart was pounding harder than the moment called for, she told herself it was adrenaline. Nothing more. If you're already rooting for these two, drop a comment telling us who you're more nervous for, Naomi or Seo-jun. We want to know you're watching. It was another 2 weeks before he finally asked the question he'd been circling since that first night. "Where did you learn to sign like that?" he asked low, while the twins were absorbed in a coloring book he'd started bringing specifically for these dinners. "You said you tutored." "Where?" Naomi's expression shifted, something guarded moved behind her eyes, quick and involuntary. "A non-profit. The Quiet Bridge Foundation. It doesn't exist anymore." Seo-jun's hand stilled on his water glass. "What happened to it?" "Funding got pulled. No warning, no explanation, just gone. One day I had a classroom of 11 kids who trusted me, and the next I had a termination email and a box of my things by the door." She said it lightly, like she'd practiced saying it lightly, like the lightness was the only way to survive saying it at all. "It was the worst 2 months of my life. I'd built something with those kids. Real relationships. And it just ended, and I never even got to say goodbye to them." Seo-jun's face had gone very still. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice had changed, quieter, careful in a new way. "That sounds like it took something from you." "It did." Naomi looked at him, something searching in her expression, like she was trying to read whether he understood or was just being polite. "It's part of why I'm finishing my degree now. Deaf education, interpreting certification. I don't want to build something that fragile again, I want something that can't just vanish because someone decides it's not worth funding anymore. She didn't know the name of the man who'd funded it. She'd never been told. It hadn't mattered before, the program had simply existed, and then it hadn't. Seo-jun knew exactly whose name had been on that funding line. His late wife's. The Quiet Bridge Foundation, Elena's project, the one she'd poured herself into after Yeji and Jiwoo were diagnosed, the one she'd built specifically so children like his own would have somewhere safe to be understood. He remembered her coming home lit up about a new tutor she'd hired. She's incredible with the kids, Seo-jun. You have to meet her sometime. And then Elena had gotten sick, and then Elena had died, and in the 12 months of grief and chaos that followed, the foundation's day-to-day management had passed to the philanthropy office. He hadn't checked on it in 18 months. He'd assumed it was fine. He'd assumed wrong. And sitting across from him right now, telling him about the worst 2 months of her life, was a woman who might have been the incredible tutor his wife had once tried to introduce him to, a woman who had already loved his children once, in a version of their lives she didn't even know overlapped with his own. This is the moment everything shifts. If you felt that in your chest, hit subscribe now. You are not ready for what Seo-jun finds next. He went home that night and didn't sleep. He pulled every archived file the philanthropy office had on the Quiet Bridge Foundation, enrollment records, staff rosters, the termination paperwork he'd never personally reviewed because grief had made him hand off anything that touched Elena's name. And there it was, 3 pages into a staff list from 2 years ago, Naomi Carter, lead tutor. Cross-referenced against student files, Han, Yeji, Han, Jiwoo, enrolled. Naomi hadn't just tutored deaf children in the abstract. She had tutored his children. During the same 2 years his twins had a tutor who made them light up, the same 2 years Elena had raved about at dinner, and then, right around the time Elena's illness took over everything, the foundation had gone quiet, its funding rerouted without his knowledge or approval, and Naomi had lost the kids she loved without ever being told why. He sat with that for a long time. There was a version of tonight where he told her immediately, where he said, I know why the foundation closed, and I know who you tutored, and it changes everything, but grief and instinct told him timing mattered, that a truth this big, delivered wrong, could do more damage than good. He decided to wait. Just until after the company's anniversary gala. Just until he had proof of who had actually pulled the funding, so he could bring her the whole truth instead of half of it. It was, he would realize later, exactly the wrong call. Because while he was quietly building his case, someone else already knew Naomi's name, and had reasons of her own for making sure it never resurfaced in a way that mattered. Regina Marsh had run Han Group's philanthropy arm since Elena's death, and she had run it, in practice, like her own private budget line. The Quiet Bridge Foundation's funding hadn't disappeared. It had been quietly folded into a new initiative, one with a gala, a press release, and Regina's name featured prominently on every piece of signage. She'd buried the closure paperwork under Seo-jun's grief-fogged signature and never looked back, and in 2 years, no one had asked a single question. Regina also had a plan for Seo-jun that didn't include a waitress. Drop a comment if you already don't trust Regina, you're right not to. The Han Group Anniversary Gala was the kind of event Naomi had only ever worked, never attended. Seo-jun invited her personally, which felt like its own kind of miracle, and she spent longer than she'd admit picking an outfit that wouldn't make her feel like an imposter in a room full of people who'd never had to count out rent money in their heads. It didn't help. She felt every eye that flicked over her and dismissed her within the first 10 minutes. She felt it most sharply when Regina Marsh found her near the bar, smiling with all her teeth, and none of her warmth. You must be the waitress, Regina said, in a voice pitched to carry to the small cluster of donors nearby. Seo-jun's been so taken with you. It's sweet, really. Though I have to say, the help usually doesn't get a seat at this particular table. I was invited, Naomi said evenly. Of course you were. Regina's smile sharpened. Though I do wonder, didn't you used to work for some little non-profit? The Quiet Bridge thing. I remember when that fell apart. Such a shame, all that funding wasted on a program that couldn't even keep its own doors open. The words hit exactly where they were meant to. Naomi's chest went tight, humiliation and confusion colliding, because how did this woman even know about the foundation, and why did she say fell apart like it was Naomi's failure, and not something done to her? Across the room, Seo-jun caught the shift in Naomi's face, and started moving toward them, too late to stop what came next. I'm sorry, Naomi said, low and shaking, have we met? Because it's strange that you know so much about a program that closed without anyone telling me why. Small industry, Regina said breezily. Funding cuts happen. Nothing personal. Seo-jun arrived in time to hear the last of it, and something in his expression went cold in a way Naomi had never seen. But before he could speak, Naomi turned on him instead, because she'd been putting pieces together all night, watching the tension in his jaw every time the foundation came up, and she wasn't willing to be the only person in this conversation without the full picture anymore. You knew, she said quietly, devastatingly, in front of Regina, in front of half the room. This whole time. You knew something about the foundation, and you didn't tell me. This is the confrontation you've been waiting for. If your heart is racing right now, hit subscribe, because Seo-jun's answer is about to change everything. Seo-jun didn't look away from her. I found out a week ago. Naomi, you tutored my children. You were their teacher for 2 years, back when my wife was alive, back before everything fell apart. I found your name in the enrollment records. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you without it destroying you. The room had gone very quiet around them. Elena Han was your wife, Naomi said, the pieces slamming into place all at once, the funder's name she'd never been given, the reason the foundation had folded exactly when a woman she'd never met had died. Your wife funded the foundation. Your children were my children. I loved those kids, Mr. Han, I loved every single one of them, and I never got to say goodbye because someone made sure I never even knew who to ask. I didn't make that decision, Seo-jun said. I didn't even know it had happened until last week. But I know who did. He turned, finally, to Regina, whose smile had gone brittle at the edges. You closed the foundation 18 months ago. Not because the funding ran out, because you redirected it into your own initiative, and buried the paperwork under my signature while I was too deep in grief to notice. You've spent 2 years letting me believe there was nothing left to save. Seo-jun, that's not. I have the records, Regina. Every wire transfer. Every altered file. His voice was quiet, precise, absolutely unshakable. You had every donor in this room believe you built something. You built it out of a program that was already saving children you shut out, including my own, because it was easier than doing the work yourself. Regina's face went white, then red, then she was being quietly, efficiently escorted from the ballroom by 2 people from Han Group security while 200 guests watched her legacy dissolve in real time. If you saw that coming, comment I called it below, and if you didn't, let us know that too. It was Yeji who moved first. She'd been standing near the edge of the crowd with Jiwoo, watching adults do the confusing, tense things adults do, and the second she caught her father say a name she recognized, Naomi, something in her small face cracked open with recognition so total it stopped the air in Naomi's lungs. Naomi. Yeji signed, fast, urgent, disbelieving. My Naomi. Naomi dropped to her knees right there on the ballroom floor, ruining a dress she couldn't afford to ruin, and signed back with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Yes. It's me. I never forgot you. Either of you. Jiwoo threw himself into her arms so hard he nearly knocked her over, and Yeji followed a half-second later, and Naomi held both of them in the middle of a room full of the same people who'd looked past her an hour earlier, the same room where Regina had called her the help, and now every single person in it was watching her be the most important person there. Seo-jun crouched beside them, one hand resting on his daughter's back, watching Naomi hold his children like she'd never once let go of them, and understood, finally, exactly what he'd been circling for 6 weeks without letting himself name it. I want to relaunch the foundation, he said quietly, once the twins had calmed enough to breathe. Properly funded. Permanently. And I want you to help me build it, not as a favor, not as an apology. Because you're the reason it ever worked in the first place. Naomi looked up at him, still holding Yeji's hand, Jiwoo's head resting against her shoulder. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that a lot. Later, once the gala had quieted and the twins had finally fallen asleep in the back of the car, Naomi and Seo-jun stood outside under string lights neither of them had noticed on the way in, the whole strange unraveling of the night settling into something softer. 2 years, Naomi said. I spent 2 years wondering what happened to those kids. Wondering if they were okay. They asked about you, Seo-jun said. For months after the foundation closed. I didn't understand why at the time. I do now. Naomi huffed something between a laugh and a sob. This is the strangest way I've ever fallen for someone. I'll take strange, Seo-jun said, if it means it's real. She signed something to him then, slow, deliberate, so he couldn't miss it even without the training his children had. Stay. He didn't need the twins to translate that one. He signed it back, clumsy, earnest, exactly right. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved us to tell it, hit subscribe, drop a comment with your favorite moment, and give this video a like before you go. It helps this channel more than you know, and it means we get to bring you more stories just like this one. Thank you for staying until the very end.